A lot of films would just, oh, a couple kisses, they lie down, there's some sexy saxophone music, and you like pan over some naked bodies, and people are, oh, they're in love. You know, it's not the most interesting way of doing lovemaking scenes. To be honest with you, love is tricky. Love can be dangerous. It can set you out of your sense of control, and it can be the most beautiful and the most horrendous thing.
Hi, Joachim. It's so lovely to meet you. I am such a huge fan of the Oslo trilogy, and I have so many things that I want to ask you about. The Oslo trilogy, of which The Worst Person in the World is the third installment, it's all about these young adults who have this whole idea of what their life is going to be like, and then they get older and realize that it's nothing like they planned. And I know this was a fear you had in your 20s because you've spoken about writing commercials and not ever knowing if you were going to get to direct a feature film. What was your perspective on this fear like back then, and how has it evolved with each subsequent film in the trilogy?
No, thank you. Thank you for your compliment and your enthusiasm about my Norwegian work. That's a good question. I think you're right. I think a lot of the films that I've made, particularly the three kind of the Oslo trilogy, as we call them now, are dealing with people who feel some sense of pressure, either from not only from society, but also from themselves, to try to achieve something great, to try to have a great destiny. And that becomes rather troublesome and dramatic for them in different variations throughout these films. And I guess there is something about being Norwegian, perhaps, or also being a part of an environment or a class, many places in the world, I think, where you have these great expectations that you need to live up to. And somehow the sense of how to fit into that is not, I've seen a lot of people feel that they don't quite belong in that sense of ideas that they're presented with. And in my case, it was kind of, I think, yeah, as you said, I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker. I didn't know how that was going to happen. And I struggled really hard, and I found it dramatic. And I was very lucky to get into film school, and very fortunate. And I still feel now in my late 40s, very fortunate to be allowed to make films. It's not something I take for granted, you know. So I guess if you find purpose in life, that becomes your battle, like making art or doing something specific that you care about. And if you don't have that, then that's your battle, trying to figure that out. So
I wanted to ask you also about the city of Oslo itself. It's the setting of 4 of your 5 films. And there's this montage that I love at the beginning of Oslo 31st August, in which people are just talking about the things they love about the city. From the perspective of a writer and a director, what aspects of Oslo are you drawn to?
it's very interesting. I like in movies that they feel like an experience for the audience, that you take people to a place. The irony is, of course, that when people in Oslo see my films, they're like, oh, that's how you see Oslo. That's not how I see Oslo. You know, it's always subjective, but it's trying to find the beauty or the dramatic value of a place. I think that's a very cinematic thing that we forget. Sometimes we talk a lot about storytelling and telling stories and plot, but to me, movies should also be about conveying a place and a feeling of a place, the light, the architecture, the people. So to me, I guess I've learned more about being from Oslo through making the films, because you have to sharpen your gaze. What is worth looking at, you know? And then you start thinking about streets and places and environments in a different way. So I think that one of the things I know I really love about the city I grew up in, Oslo, is the light. I really love the fact that during the winter, it's really dark. So when spring and summer arrives, and you almost have no darkness because it's so far north, you know, you have these beautiful summer nights with a little bit of light on the sky, and long processes of mornings when the sun is slowly coming up, and amazing colors on the sky and stuff. And you really appreciate it because of the seasonal changes. And I've tried to capture that in my films. So, you know, it's being specific, trying to see where you can find beauty and show it to other people around the world. It's become a great privilege that what I perceived as a little unimportant place when I grew up, no one cared about Oslo. Like suddenly now I'm talking to you, a different place in the world, and you've seen my films, and that matters hugely to me.
I also want to ask you about Renate. We have to talk about her because she's incredible in the film. What did she bring to the role of Julie that wasn't in the script? And were there times when her ideas of Julie differed from yours and Eskil's?
Yeah, I mean, Renate, for those who don't know, I mean, she had a tiny part in
Mhm.
Oslo, August 31st, and 10 years passed, and I was expecting her after having worked with her on that little one line of dialogue part that she played. I was thinking she's so good, she's going to be amazing, and she's going to be famous, and she was more famous in theater than in film. She didn't really get any lead parts, so she got this. We wrote this part for her, and we knew. So your question is a good question. What did she bring? I think in a way we sculpted the idea of Julie around her. Of course, this is not her story in a biographical sense, but it's a lot of the humor and also the drama of it, the emotion of the character comes also from Renate's capacity to create some sort of order out of the chaos of the character we wrote. Like she held it down, she made it specific, you know? And I think she was very smart. It's hard to define what it was that she brought in terms of the storytelling, but every day on set, I felt I had a companion that really understood the characters and sometimes challenged me. For example, in the breakup scene with Axel, there were certain aspects of like how she wanted to attack him and certain things she wanted to change the words. And that really brought more nuance and complexity to the scene. So it was a great collaboration.
You said before that part of your process is to always invite actors to talk to you about the scenes they're most nervous about. Was there a scene that Renata was really anxious about, and how did you talk her through it?
Yeah, that's true. I think my main job is to try to support the actor, almost like in the achievement of experimenting and trying to get an interesting performance and be their friend and their ally rather than to order them to do this or that. You know, I try to support their interpretation of it as much as I can. I think Renata was quite, to be honest with you, she's not very anxious. She's very brave, actually, which is one of the things I find very admirable about her. I know that there were moments where we had to do transitions. Like, of course, how would the process of her aging, like, would you believe that she went through a long period of time and how she looked and those things she was kind of saying, well, you know, I don't want to overact young and old or something. That would be like cheesy. So I think the support we got from hair and makeup and costumes somehow made Renate appear differently, and then she could play off of that in a subtle way. And that's something we spend a lot of time talking about. What is the physical development of the character, because it's subtle. I think some of the big tasks, the crying, the yelling, the drama, you know, the running, all of that stuff, she's kind of tough and she's like, I look forward to that. That's going to be interesting. But the subtle nuance things about time development, I think those are challenging, but she did very well.
I love the scene in which Julie runs from Axel's apartment to Ivan's coffee shop because time is such a recurring theme in the Oslo trilogy. Whether it's all of the flash forwards and reprise and all of the what ifs, or whether it's just the lament for lost time in Oslo 31st August. And this feels like such a corrective to that, the ability to just slow down time and stop it and experience all of the things you want to. What was your approach when you were writing that scene, and how did you end up shooting it?
It's I really I'm grateful for your question. I think your observations about my movies are very accurate. I think I've realized now that I've made them that they are dealing with the movement of time, the imagined time, the subjective time, the experience time, the past, all of those ways in which we try to grapple with the sometimes very rapid movement of life and the anxiety to miss out on the big parts. And I think that I've been looking in my movies for a moment to stop time, freeze time, as you say, you know. And I think this was an opportunity to convey almost the most romantic thing I've ever done. Not only romantic in a sort of amorous way, which is, of course, it is. It's someone falling in love in a forbidden kind of love, you know, that she feels ambivalent about, but it's also romantic in the sense of letting the imagined or the free thought take over the film and be told without any resistancy, you know, which is kind of hard because, let's be honest, most interesting drama comes from conflict. And in this scene, we're kind of letting it go. We're leaving conflict behind for a moment to experience something just very joyful and sweet. And so I wanted to feel then a bit like a musical. And I wanted all these people to be frozen in time, but I didn't want it to feel slick or cold or too, how should I say, if I'd done it more sort of digitally, I would have been worried it would just look like a slick commercial or something. So I had people stand still and choreographed so that people would just stand still around Oslo. And it was really fun to shoot.
Can you talk me through the imagery of the whole hallucinogenic scene, right? From Julie throwing her tampon at her father to seeing herself as this older woman to breastfeeding a child. How did you arrive at each of those specific bits of imagery?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. The trip scene, yeah, no, it was really some crazy days in the writing room when we were like, what are the themes that Julie could be dealing with if we accessed her subconscious? Because it goes a little bit beyond her intentions as a character. It's almost like her subconscious is throwing these situations at her, like the anxiety of the aging body and feeling out of place in yourself, which I think is a very human experience, but it's done sort of literally in this very hallucinating situation. But I also think it's the whole idea of female body versus the kind of father who somehow has neglected seeing her, and the anger, the suppressed anger that I feel Julie experiences. And I shot a lot of extra material that I didn't use in the film because I think that it works as it is now. But I had a lot of verbal confrontation between Julie and her father, which actually I think helped us understand other levels of the character. Things that about very explicitly yelling at her father and being mad at him for things he had done or maybe hadn't done for her more than anything. But as the film came together in the edit, I realized that I think it's there at play somehow. And I want the audience also to fill in their own experiences of perhaps anger towards a parent or something, or towards someone in their life. And I found it interesting, but I was nervous about it. Because, you know, I'm a man, and in this day and age, there is a great attention as to what we are allowed to tell according to who we are. And I understand the need to talk about appropriating things, but I think that as a storyteller, in this case, it was very important to me to try to be truthful to the character Julie. And there's sort of a liberating movement in creating something, as it is also a collaborative process. We are several people. Yes, we are two men writing, but we are also a big team of producers and actors that are from different, different genders, different backgrounds. And we talk and we try to find truth in the character. And that to me is a very joyful and liberating experience. And all I can hope for is that it will somehow, in all its wackiness, this sequence that we're talking about will make sense to some people. And it seems like it has, and that makes me very happy.
You've spoken about being a man, so I have to ask you about the sex scenes in this movie, because they're shot from the point of view of female agency and a woman taking control. From the scene in which Julie's biting Ivan's butt, it's the woman taking control. Or the scene in which she breaks up with Axel, they have sex, but it's focused on female pleasure. When you have two men writing a movie like this, what are the thought process behind these sex scenes?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I mean, the film is dealing with pleasure, passion. It's a love story. Sexuality, in my view, is not something that should be hidden away, something bad. It's a beautiful, important part of being human. So how do we approach that without falling into cliche, and how do we show in a medium, which is film, which objectifies us? When you're just talking in a film, you almost become plastic. You become an object. You become an image. You are not a real person. So this is in the nature of cinema. So then taking a camera into the bedroom, which is a private, intimate situation, one needs to be very cautious to not just create cliche. A lot of films would just, a couple kisses, they lie down, there's some sexy saxophone music, and you like pan over some naked bodies. And people are, they're in love. It's not the most interesting way of doing a lovemaking scene. So I realized, since we're working very subjectively in some of those scenes with Julie and her passion for Ivan and his physicality. I spoke very honestly with the actors and told them, like, I have a plan and I want to be very clear and I want you all to be comfortable, but I really want us to feel that a woman can also look at a man in that way, because I think it's truthful. I think that's just as it's quite equal between men and women, is my experience. It's not like the world is a place where men look and women are objects. We're all at moments hopefully beautiful to each other. So I wanted to talk about that, and I wanted to be smart about it. And it turns out that I think a lot of people responded well. But it is that thing of making cinema, that you lend your view to characters and then you step back in your objective, and that becomes subjective. So as a director, when I film a city, it's very subjective for me because I will want to see it from exactly this angle. But when I'm showing characters engaging with each other, sometimes I lend the view to them. It's almost as if their subjectivity is my objectivity. It's my way of going with a character, letting the fiction lead it. It's not just a man creating who's seeing, but it's actually trying to understand how Julie sees. And that becomes the art of it, if that makes sense. So to me, it's an interesting exercise with every character, regardless of gender, age. Like, what is it to see with this character? That fascinates me in cinema.
I also wanted to ask you about the way you approach love throughout the Oslo trilogy, because it's either a force that creates an instability in the protagonists or it causes them great pain. Why is the happy ever after, at least on romantic terms, so elusive for you?
That could turn into a very personal question. I think I've come a long way. I think I'm older. I'm more relaxed about it now. And I think therefore I could make the worst person in the world, which I think is more hopeful than the others. But there's also a strong sense of compassion and love in Reprise, the first film, but it's divided. Some of the boys are very childish in that film and very unresolved and very scared of girls or women, I think. Whereas others have grown, like the Philip character understands the need for companionship and friendship with Kari, who he loves very, very much. And there's kind of in my view, a development in that film. But it's true. I mean, to be honest with you, love is tricky. Love can be dangerous. It can be, it can set you out of your sense of control, and it can be the most beautiful and the most horrendous thing. I think anyone who's lived a life of experience can say that that's true. Isn't that right? I mean, it's complicated, and it's also the moment in a life where you can be very good at planning, where you're abrupted, you're set out of balance. And I think we learn through losing balance. I think love can be a very, very important journey of growth, but it can also be quite unpleasurable at times. It depends. So since I'm interested in going into the dark spots sometimes of life, into the dark areas where I think cinema needs to probe sometimes, because we are getting so many films that are talking just about joy and happiness, and blah, blah. Like sometimes it's important to go into the difficult spots, and love is certainly a place for great drama. But as I started out saying, I feel that I'm more optimistic these days, and I hope that the worst person in the world is reflecting that journey.
Several of the characters in the Oslo trilogy, and even in your film Louder Than Bombs, they're writers, and the worst person in the world is even structured like a novel and divided into chapters. Why is this a recurring element in your work?
I think I steal from the novel, not to try to create a book, but to try to find a freer way of telling a story with a movie. I think that's my thing. I think I'm interested in the rush of jumping back and forth in time, changing pace, changing moods, changing perspective sometimes, things that you do easily in a book, but that we're often told is not the right thing to do in cinema. So when I make movies, I try to lean on music and lean on novels to kind of think that we can play around a bit more. And yeah, that's become a part of our style. It's just something that happens, I think. I think I'm also a bit of a restless person, so maybe that mirrors my temperament. I don't know.
The film also takes on cancel culture at one point, because when Axel's questioned about his sexist comics, he says, I think art should be messy and free, and we shouldn't stop creating just because people might feel bad. is there a line that you draw as a writer and as a director?
Yeah, I'm trying to not see only one side in this, because I see it's a very complex thing. And I think everyone's allowed to have an opinion. I guess that's the bottom line. The woman who attacks him is probably right as well, that there is something childish and a bit provocative in his early comics, I imagine. You know, I imagine it like that. He was probably provocateur, someone that during the 90s got famous from pissing people off a bit and being kind of a funny and cheeky, a bit of an asshole artist. And suddenly some years later, someone's saying, listen, there's a lot of that. We don't want it anymore. And he feels hurt because he felt that he was doing something free and fun, and suddenly he looks back and he doesn't know anymore what it means, you know. So yes, I agree that art should be allowed to be messy. People should accept that there is provocation, and that's a necessary way for a democracy to move forward, is that sometimes we get hurt or pissed off to an extent where it's meaningful or intelligent, but there is a limit even to that, of course. But I don't think that it's an easy subject, and I think we need to talk much more about it in a generous way. Listen to each other, everyone, you know, like I'm not sure. I see case by case that I change opinion sometimes, depending. I don't think that to use freedom of speech to hurt people is very sophisticated. I think that's actually rather silly and stupid. But sometimes there are groups that needs to be satirized, people empowered, and needs to be made fun of. We've done that for thousands of years. And then it can be virtuous to be a provocateur, you know? So, and sometimes everyone laughs at a bit of a stupid joke, you know, and that should be allowed too. So I think we're in an interesting time where we're negotiating these things. And I have to say, I fall on the side of the freedom of speech a lot. I think it's important that people are allowed to make mistakes when they create art, but that we also respect people's feelings and that people need to be heard. If there's a homogeny of repressive expression, like let's say, you know, the discussion of a lot of movies representing women in a stupid, derogatory way. Let's talk about that. Let's not do that. I want things to move forward. On the other hand, we all need to accept that once in a while there's a joke that hurts us. I mean, I have, for example, I'll give you a silly example, but actors are good at making parodies, and every time I make a film, they all want to like compete making a joke about parody, like making fun of me, and I let them. And sometimes I'm like, oh my God, am I that stupid? It's a little bit hurtful, but genuinely, I know that they care about me, so I'll take it. You know, there is this moment of some subject or even yourself being seen from the outside, and as long as it's not mean-spirited, we need to accept that there are different angles at this.
Joachim, thank you so much for your time. It was lovely speaking to you.
Likewise, thank you.